Okay, class. So, um, there's certain. It's kind of intense. I guess I don't know what the word is. Is when um, we see this violence taking place in the world now, and how people deal with political issues through violence. And looking at the chats that we've had going over Nat Turner, the rebellion, and finding ourselves uncomfortable about the legacy of Nat Turner on many different levels. One, the fact that children were killed. Um, and then the other side of it is the very violence that was necessary to maintain slavery, and the blind violence that was enacted on what are now anonymous slaves, and retribution for that. And now we're coming into where whites are going to be kind of filling in for Nat Turner, if you will, in terms of at least some, this idea that violence would be the only way to deal with a violent institution of slavery. And I hope that right now what you're going to see, especially, we're going to watch a long documentary, but I think as you're seeing with the Nat Turner one, and like we're going to see with John Brown, the best time you could spend is well worth it in terms of getting a handle, a grasp on what brought America to where we're at, right? What is this legacy that has been plaguing us to where we still have movements like Black Lives Matter, which all I'm going to say for now on that is the issue of what it means to be black in America is still an issue for many people on different political views now, right? And which is something that I kind of talked about early when I was introducing this class. And then we had the issue of what's going on, with the issues of race on college campuses right now, and football teams going on strike. The issue we had earlier with the Confederate flag and what that symbolizes, and should that be allowed in on federal buildings. By the way, I think that we should not confuse that debate. Maybe some have debated if individuals have a right to the Southern flag, but I think that was the misleading narrative. The issue was, should a federal government, should any member from the state level to the federal government be able to wave a Confederate flag in a positive way outside of a museum? That was the real debate. Now, I'm going to keep repeating this, but the South to this day, and this is not a slight on the South, by the way, and I want to make this very clear. My grandmother was a Southerner, and she was an awesome grandmother at that. And so, I think that most of us that come from a long line of Americans in the United States, especially white America, have a northern legacy and a southern legacy as well. So we have to kind of come to terms, though, with what this was, which was a family feud that we had in the Civil War, on that level when I say we, and then as a nation. Okay, now, returning back to what I was trying to say, Southern schools now, public schools, did an excellent job of rewriting this history. And for all the complaints that you hear sometimes from people about, liberal socialists manipulating the history of students, and I've tried to address that in a fair way. And obviously, someone like Howard Zen is pushing a particular agenda that kind of breaks with the traditional kind of patriotic narrative, if you want to put it that way. Okay, right? On the other hand, many, I was reading a survey that most white Southerners believe that the Civil War wasn't about slavery. And in fact, many of my students have been writing to me convinced that it was about something else. And I'm going to be, going over several things. Once we get to the Civil War, I'm going to just kind of put the nails into the coffin of this argument pretty strongly. And I really want to get it through your heads that there really isn't a strong case to argue that the Civil War was anything other than a war over slavery. And again, not a war over racism, a war over slavery. Okay? And feel free, by the way, because I'm making a very strong statement. You notice that I try to be not too biased on certain things, but I'm making a very definitive statement right now. Okay? If you feel like you have strong evidence to put otherwise, most of you know by now, I'm not going to be offended by that or upset. I'll gladly take on that challenge. But let's just take a look at this now. So what am I saying? We're going into the crisis of the 1850s. And what I have been arguing, and I talk about this when I have discussions with people over this issue, is that Americans were killing each other over the slavery argument before the Civil War. The Civil War only officially starts later on. But the violence and the tensions between the North and the South over slavery were occurring already. And yes, there were other issues. There was different factors. There were some other economic interests. There was the issue of some aspects of state rights. So the argument that the South makes still many times is that it was states' rights versus the North. Well, as one West Point professor argues, which I'll show you later, when we talk about states' rights, what are those rights? What were the rights that they were talking about? Now, this picture here, where we're going to go into more detail, is when in the in a political debate in Washington, a Southerner nearly bludgeoned to death an anti-slavery politician on the floor. Okay, so this is what was happening in America at the time. Now you're going to notice I'm not going through a lot of the presidents very much on this one until we get to Lincoln. And I'm kind of using the other presidents that we're discussing a little bit as a backdrop, okay? I would like to focus more on different presidents, but sometimes I just feel like, with the topic at hand, I have to pick and choose what I want to focus on. So pardon me, Franklin Pierce, not getting too much attention. Basically, though, what's kind of going on at the time? There were these the compromise of 1850 is talked about in your textbook, and I told you to look over only like briefly. I hope you're not totally bogged down. You have a lot of reading and a long film to watch. But essentially, we're talking about how are we going to survive? How is the Union going to survive as this debate between a state being free or having a slave? Okay, and actually, I will go into more details of what that's all about later. Ultimately, we're seeing a realignment of parties. Okay, you had the Whigs that were in response to Andrew Jackson. The Democrats, don't forget, the Democratic Party is really the slave party. Okay, so don't ever lose the irony that President Obama, whatever you think of him, the first black president to get elected in the United States, was elected through a party that was once the official slave party. Okay, but the party shifted its platform, but the party was the slave party. And then there was a group, a kind of one party issue called the Free Soil Party, which was solely based on trying to end slavery. So we have a political party at this time its sole purpose is to end slavery. I don't know if you remember, there was one guy running for president. Was it last time around? And he was basically, I think the party called himself "The Rent's Too Damn High," and that was all he ever said. The rent's too damn high. One issue. This, though, of course, was a big issue and it was turned into the issue, okay, during this election. Now, I'm going to end here because what I want to talk about is something very fundamental in the talk in this debate about states' rights, and how we could really argue that went both ways in terms of this debate. So I'll end here, and then we'll go on to the next lecture.